SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CEOs and CMOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Ben Page-Fort. Ben works with early and growth stage FinTechs to develop and execute go-to-market strategy. Ben was CRO of Solovis, which was acquired by NASDAQ, where he subsequently ran sales for NASDAQ's investment intelligence. Hey, Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And before we dig in, could you tell people just a little bit more about you and what you're up to lately?
Sure. So, as you said, I've been in the fintech space pretty much my whole career, always on the sales side, going from individual contributor working in the field at IBM up and to much smaller companies where I started running sales teams and subsequently full revenue and commercial organizations. So sales, marketing, client success, pre-sales, ops, all that stuff. Today, I'm working with a handful of early and growth stage fintechs around their go-to-market strategy, and one large Danish fintech called SimCorp, where I'm doing corporate strategy work for them, and they're in the process of being acquired.
Excellent. Well, everybody likes an exit, especially if they've got a little piece of the action. So good for you. Congrats. And, I think you're the first CRO we've had on the podcast, and I'm kind of excited about the topics we agreed to talk about. And I also want to confess to having a prior relationship with you. If any of our listeners are really going to dig in, Ben and I are very effective tennis doubles partners. So we've had a lot of fun playing tennis together the last few years. So let's get right into it. One of the things I really loved about our prep session was when we talked about the need from your perspective. And I invited you on because I wanted to really understand what sales wants from marketing, because in marketing, we think we know what's best. So I wanted to get your perspective as a sales leader in the enterprise SaaS space. And one of the things you said that I thought was really cool was, I feel the need to get marketing in the boat. And I'd love to have you kind of just expand on that idea a little bit, what that means to you as a sales leader, what you're looking for in a marketing organization, marketing leader partner.
Sure. So there are endless references and anecdotes and things that people say in our corporate world about pulling the oars in the same direction and all one team, one dream, and all those things. Getting in the boat together is mine. What it means to me is having shared goals and performance indicators, if you will, with teeth, meaning really qualitative goals. Sales always has quotas. We're out there looking for logos. We have a quota we're going after. Client success has a retention quota they're going after. They have NPS score levels that they're going after. Marketing needs one too. Marketing's quota in my world is opportunity commit or revenue commit. They are saying at the beginning of the year, I will get you X number of leads, which will lead to Y number of opportunities and Z revenue. They're doing it with finance and with sales and with the CEO. And they're all writing it down together and saying, this is the number we're going after. So 6 months into the year, 12 months later, when you sit down and the dust has settled, you look back and say, I was successful or I failed. And you have a hard number attached to it. And it's not wishy-washy and you're not explaining it away. It's not gray. It's black or white. You got it or you didn't. Quotas are black and white, though sometimes we wish they weren't. And having that and having it structured in unison with sales and finance and the overall executive team makes it something that you can really hold a marketing organization to, and everyone can be in the boat together, whether it's sailing quickly or sinking like a stone.
Well, like our double season this year.
Yeah.
But when we talked last time, you actually didn't talk so much about leads, right? You were looking at different kinds of KPIs. And I think the problem I have with calling something a lead from a marketing perspective is that we can manufacture those leads, right? We can invent a rubric that says, hey, Mary attended a webinar, downloaded an ebook. Golly, she must be a hot lead, when she might be a researcher doing a background study, right? She might be nothing at all. So do you have some ideas that maybe are a little different, a little more revealing of the actual contribution of marketing?
Yeah. And I like commits to be further downstream. We spend a lot of time talking in my world about outcome-based selling. You're not selling a widget, you're selling an outcome. You're selling, an outcome that someone's able to achieve. The thing you sold them just helps them get there. There's no difference internally. A lead is something that you need to get to the outcome we're looking for, which is revenue. It's actual money that comes in the door. So if the commit is on revenue, you then back out of that and you start building goals and metrics attached to it. So if we know that we need 100 leads, MQLs to get 5 SQLs and 5 SQLs to get one late stage deal, then that's the kind of thing we then can build out based on the revenue target that we both have.
But I think there's even more to it, right? I think when we talked last time, we started talking about things like, reasonable engagements, like conversations, meetings that aren't, get the demo to try and drag the prospect kicking and screaming over the finish line. I just kind of feel like, especially in the world you often operate in, these large scale deals, we might even know who all these people are in advance, right? I mean, if we're talking about in your world, like order management systems for large scale broker dealers, there's how many hundred names, right? And those are the logos.
Yeah, depending on who you're selling to, what your market size looks like, what your sales velocity is, the metrics can change a little bit. But what I think becomes interesting is the bigger the deal, the more enterprise grade. Enterprise deals are great because they usually have way higher ARR attached to them, but they take a long time. They're usually messy and they're a team sport, meaning a salesperson isn't out there grabbing a lead that marketing threw over the fence in April and closing a deal that, they did 2 demos themselves, they did the negotiation themselves, and they come in, and ring the bell in June. It doesn't happen that way. It takes 6, 12, 24 months sometimes, and you've got a lot of people involved, products in there, pre-sales organization, professional services, external consultants, lots of different people involved. Because they take so long, marketing has to be along for the whole journey. And we now map out the buyer's journey. It's not my sales process journey, which is a really nice, clean funnel from they read an ebook to they signed paperwork in a linear fashion. It's a lot of curly cues and crossouts, and you do the same thing many times. You do the same introductory demo 6 times because every time you've got a different group that you've got to do it for. Marketing is involved in that whole journey. You talked about, we'll keep using your example, broker dealers. There's maybe 1,000 of them on earth. Half of that number are so small or niche that they don't even count. So you can very well have a total addressable market of like 500 accounts. That doesn't mean it's a bad market to be in because you're selling them $10, $20 million a year products. So all of a sudden, this is a really attractive space. But what it means is something very different. When you're doing account-based marketing for this group and you're doing demand gen for this group, you're looking at names within a name instead of a list of names that you're going after. The marketing is so targeted, we refer to it as spear fishing. Instead of a net, you're using spears. And you're doing that internally. So now, instead of your lead commit, let's say, that we talked about earlier, instead of it being, I've got to get 3,000 MQLs, and that'll get me, downstream to the revenue number I want. And I'm going to get them from this massive 50,000 potential account universe. Instead, I'm going to go get you 200 MQLs But those MQLs are people within a firm. So I'm going to go get you 10 different people within the same firm, and I'm going to give them this journey through marketing where I'm hitting them with thought leadership, I'm hitting them with client case studies. You're driving them along and giving different levels of touch and different sorts of, I would call it, value additive information or content at the right stage in their process as you go. And it's completely in unison with the sales team. You don't get someone from left field at your prospect as the sales rep calling you saying, what the hell is this? Why did you invite me to this conference? I don't even know who you are. No, everything is done in concert. And it gets you to a point where you're really hip and hip. And head of sales, head of marketing need to be attached at the hip to actually be effective in this way. If they're not, it's never going to go where it is, and you're going to run into a lot of finger pointing.
So this sort of sounds to me like it's an orchestration, right? We're doing these things, we're orchestrating these experiences together almost on an account by account basis, right?
Yeah. And look, it's very different than a velocity SaaS deal, that's for sure. But once you start to get to the really big stuff, this is how it works. If you look at the big SaaS players in the world, the ServiceNows and Salesforce and Workday, when you get to the high end of their business, they have a horizontal product. They sell to every vertical segment on the planet. But when you start to look at their major accounts groups, their reps have 10, maybe 15 accounts that they look after. And they have inside sales resources and marketing resources that are attached to them and those accounts. And they go after these 5 or 10 names in such a surgical way over the course of months and years, not days and weeks. And it's worth that incredibly high client acquisition cost because they stay with you for 10 or 15 years and they pay giant ARR numbers every year to do it because you're a transformative choice for them and a massive part of their BAU.
So this almost sounds like it's a manual labor process too, right? If these count numbers get so small, right? This is literally elbow grease ABM.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. We usually do it at different levels. So we'll have broader marketing that's to the whole world, your whole universe. They can access some of the thought leadership stuff. There's some advertising out there. You're working with agencies to make sure you're in the right places with the right folks. But especially in a startup environment, when you're resource constrained and you're first out there, you're not doing awareness marketing because you're not Oracle. It's not just, I have to be front of mind. No, you have to tell people who you are and why you exist and why you're special. And you can't do that by just buying LinkedIn ads. It doesn't work. The first hire in marketing a lot of the time, if done right, is not a head of marketing or a director of marketing. It's usually a demand gen person. And when you go get demand gen people, you want someone who has done demand gen, not general marketing, not, I did product before, but I know about search engine optimization, so I'm a demand gen person now. You need someone who lives and breathes demand gen because they are able to put together and really execute against this approach where, yes, we have some stuff that's out there and is findable and that's great and it brings it inbound, but really we know who we're going after. We know the problem that they're having that we're trying to solve. How do we get maniacally focused on the problem? And everything we do, every piece of content we create, every use case we try to get out there in the market from our existing client base, everything is solely focused on getting the problem statement that we know the guy that we're going after has in front of exactly the right person within a firm. So to answer your question more succinctly, yeah, it's super manual.
Well, I think it brings up a good point. I'd love you to give us the CRO's definition of demand generation.
Demand gen, in my mind, is driving quantifiable interest and starting real conversations that could theoretically go somewhere with the group of personas that we have decided to target. It does not mean clicks on the website. It does not mean number of people who show up to a webinar. Those can be parts of it, but demand gen to me is bottom line focus on getting real sales qualified leads through the door.
Yeah, listen, I agree. I think that's our world today, right? We can't be focused on manufacturing leads. It's got to be people that want to have a conversation, even if they're 6 months out from being able to buy.
Yeah.
In fact, I just left a meeting with the CEO and he said, you know what? I love what you guys are saying. And, you found me this perfect. This is just what I need. I've got a funding round to make and I'm putting you in my budget with my funding round. So there's demand gen in a nutshell. And it was a consultative review of his marketing that was visible on the open web. And through that conversation, we created a relationship and a desire to work with us. And I think that's the real lead, right? The person that wants to have the conversation and follow up with a budget.
Yeah, that's what we want. And we have to be realistic about that when we're setting goals and aspirations at the beginning of the year, or whatever the time period we're choosing to judge someone on. But really giving them that outcome-based target of this is what you're supposed to go get. And then let them be a little creative maybe in how they decide to go try to get it. But that's it. And what you just said is a perfect example of a consultative approach to going after a really narrow market. You found a company that you were excited to potentially work with because I assume that they aligned with what you view as your ideal customer. You figured out a creative way to make contact with the person. You did something that was thoughtful and clearly personalized in discussing something that they have in the world that they were excited to show people. You engaged on their turf. And it led to a positive first meeting. Not, I cold called you at lunchtime. I caught you accidentally because you thought it was your wife and answered. And now you're mad at me because I'm on, you got me on the phone. No, they're on their turf. They're excited to talk to you. They're welcoming you in instead of you breaking the door down. And it allowed you to have a meaningful conversation. In your case, it sounds like it's relatively short term. That's great. But even if it's, this is actually a huge project that we have to do, we're not doing it today. We've got 2 priorities in front of it. But after those priorities, so in 6 months, we're planning on kicking off an RFP process for exactly this. I would love to talk in 3 months to start planning what that RFP looks like. All of a sudden, you put yourself in the driver's seat.
Yeah. So I think that there's a lot there for people that have large sales, right? It's the getting on their turf, giving them value in the conversation. My first sales job at Citibank, I was the guy who was calling with like any way to get past the gatekeeper. Maybe another time I'll share my secret sauce with you. So we've been talking a bit about, the really focus on the large sale. I want to tie that up just a little bit about like what the cruel math is, right, of the enterprise sale, because there's not a lot of opportunity that any one rep is really trying to close in a year. And then the relationship between that sort of the cruel math of sales velocity and the enterprise and marketing and how they work together.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you are trying to break into an enterprise market, if you're a disruptor in a space, it's going to be slow rolling at first. You're going to have to find a couple of those early adopters that are excited to try new things and break the mold, knowing very well that 85% of the market you're trying to go after will not talk to you for the next several years. They just won't do it. It's not because what you do is bad. It's nothing like that. You might get them on the phone and they say, wow, that's the best thing I've ever seen. Their job's on the line if they try to get you. Most of them aren't going to do it. They'll just suffer with whatever they've got. But you have to get the early adopters on the phone. You've got to get them engaged, and usually you have to buy that business. But once you start to get a bit of a role and you've crossed the chasm, if you will, from early adopter into the real mainstream buyer market, you're in a place where sales reps carry huge quotas, 5 to 7 times their on-target earnings for the year, typically, because they have a lot of support. They've got tons of marketing. They've got tons of pre-sales resources. They've got a huge product team that they've got to pay for. And because the deals are big and really sticky and long-term in this SaaS world, so they can carry these big quotas. But most of these whale hunters, they miss their number every other year or every third year or so because you have 2 deals. So if you've got 2 deals in a year and one you lose and the other one slips to January, you might very well have a goose egg. So it's a very specific person willing to do this work. And at the end of the day, especially if you're in a company that sells in a couple different segments, you have to know that when you're going after the enterprise, it's really expensive and it takes a long time. And by you, I mean the executive team has to know it and they have to be comfortable with it. And the board has to know and has to be comfortable with it. They have to be understanding of the fact that you're spending a lot up front, but you're doing it for a reason. And once you land these deals, it's absolutely worth it. And there's a clear and very easy to communicate process that goes along with it that makes it worth the while.
What does the marketing side of that equation look like? Is that back to that ABM thing we were talking about?
Yeah, marketing is expensive in those cases. I created a Twitter post or X or whatever the hell they call it now. I'm creating a post every other day. That's not what you're doing. That's not what's working. You're not getting a lot of free work. You're relying on content marketing, which is expensive and laborious. And then you're relying on a lot of paid channels. If you're going through LinkedIn, which works well, it's not necessarily the paid ads, but you're really trying to focus on certain people in LinkedIn. So that gets to be pretty costly. And, we started the program with you saying, wow, that sounds really manual. Manual equals money. Humans are always the most expensive thing we do in any part of a business. You need more humans to do that work. One demand gen person can't execute against several hundred targets at once. They might be able to create a playbook. They might be able to create some content and resources, but they're not able to really execute against it beyond that. So you're either hiring more demand gen people or you're hiring inside sales folks to do that work. That opens up a whole other argument of where does inside sales live? I tend to think, especially early on, inside sales lives in demand gen, not really sales, but they become the executor. But again, that's more people, it's more mouths to feed. So it becomes a very expensive prospect, and marketing has to show incremental progress along that path and be confident in saying, this will work. This is the process that works. This is the velocity that we're seeing. I'm a big advocate of looking at velocity in things, meaning, if it takes me 6 months to close a deal, what does my lead velocity look like for the last 12 months? What direction are we going in? And you really have to have that and be pinpointed in, these are the 6 things that we really look at because they're the things that move the needle. And early on, there's a lot of guess and check involved in that.
So we've been talking about the big company movie. Let's go the other end. Let's talk about the small ARR, the 50,000, 100,000 or less ARR. How does this different? What do those companies have to do, especially the young ones?
It's funny. So one of the companies I'm working with is pretty young. They've only been around 2 years, 2.5 years. Average ticket's $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month.
Oof, that's tough.
Yeah, in some ways it is. But the remarkable thing is, if you look at all of the stuff we just talked about, all of that still sort of holds, but you have to do it in a way that is a lot more like an assembly line. If you look at how they make a Schick razor today or how they made it in 1960, it's really different, but you're getting pretty much the same thing out the door. What makes it so different is that they've automated the entirety of the supply chain and the assembly line. So instead of a person that's worked there, for 20 years and is really good at sharpening blades, it's a laser cutter in Germany. This is the same idea, where you have to take all of those same concepts. Marketing still has to sign up for a lead commit that leads to pipeline, which leads to revenue. That's not different. The percentages are going to be a little different, but we still have them. And then marketing still has to be along for the whole ride, but the ride might be 6 weeks instead of 6 months, meaning you have to be more agile and probably a lot quicker, more nimble. You're moving at a faster speed. You're getting things out there a lot quicker. Maybe instead of 5 demos, it's 1 demo. Maybe instead of 20 pieces of content that you have to hit them with in thought leadership, maybe it's 2 or 1. But the same tenets apply. Inbound still works better than outbound. It's just the case today. Do we still do outbound? Yeah, but it needs to be more thoughtful and strategic, not just dialing for dollars. Inbound, people want you to give them something before they pay you for it. They want you to tell them something that's insightful. They want you to lure them in with content. I have never paid HubSpot for anything in my life. I use their website 4 times a week because it's a library of content for building, scaling, templatizing a go-to-market structure. I steal their stuff all the time, but it's not stealing because I keep giving them my email address. And that's all they ask me for. But they lure me in. So I've never used their products. I'm a Salesforce person through and through. I know that lots of people don't like that anymore. But HubSpot,
dude,
I think they're great.
I don't know about our whole partnership now. We're going to have to talk about this.
As a company, I think HubSpot's great. And if tomorrow I was implementing a new CRM, a new marketing automation system, they'd probably be the first place I called. Not because I use it, but because they've helped me. And that goes a long way. You find your markets, you find your problems that you're trying to solve, and you focus on the problem you're trying to solve. If you can solve it for 200,000 companies instead of 200, Godspeed. I think that's great. You just have to put things on rails a lot sooner.
So the idea that you have to automate more, or you said put it on rails, so it has to be less human involvement per prospect opportunity is really what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the path to the close, that buyer's journey, is probably a lot shorter. It might even be a PLG motion, right? Where they don't even have to give a credit card to get going.
No, that's great. I mean, you look at some of the consumption models that you're seeing out there, where something like Twilio, which is massive now, they started by just opening up their API library and saying, developers, come fiddle around. And you had some developers come in and they're like, oh, cool. I can use my own skill set to get messaging built into my app. It's like $5 to start because I only have 2 customers. But all of a sudden, they plug it in. They're not going to take it out. So when they go from 5 customers to 5 million because it's a B2C and they have a cool little cheap app, all of a sudden Twilio is making real money off of them. They never lifted a finger beyond that initial build out of an API library. So having that is great. And then you start to see, sticking with that example, they still have an amazing user community where they pretty much just built and now monitor and administrate a chat board where all of these people come together and are so excited to talk shop on their turf. And they just see the dollars rolling in behind it because people are using their product more and more and more. And their biggest customers, they said, oh, wow, you started out as a $5,000 customer. Now you're a $5 million customer. We can't lose you now. We liked having you, but we didn't care that much before. Now, if we lose you, we're in actual trouble. We better create a relationship team. We better send you marketing information, even though you're already a customer. We better keep you up to date on all of the fun stuff we're doing and invite you to conferences. And when we're doing a user group in your town, we have to make sure you and your people are there. And maybe, oh, wow, maybe there's more opportunity that we can reach out to you directly and open up a whole new business within your organization because only one little corner of American Express is using Twilio today. And there's 200 more groups that could potentially use it. And all of a sudden, it's funny to see how you start getting this where very quickly you're segmenting your customer base and you're segmenting them based on how they use the thing and to what level they're using it. And frankly, through that motion, how much money they're paying you. And you're starting to get to a group where you have all these different groups. Maybe you have a massive PLG motion. That's your primary thing. And it brings in tons of money for you. But maybe you realize pretty quickly, yeah, we have one, but it's starting to slow down. And you look at the adoption arc and it's really flattened out over the last 6 months. But the other groups, the enterprise group, exploded. And it's really interesting to see how all of these PLG motions, the folks that were so excited to start with them, Dropbox, great example. Dropbox probably had the longest run as a PLG motion. They didn't have salespeople forever. And then finally they realized, well, I guess we have to have relationship people in sales and marketing. It's word of mouth doesn't work once you're past, 50 million users. So they all start to move in that direction later on, but you can get into it much easier on a PLG motion for sure.
Yeah, you can build the enterprise team as you see adoption, right?
Yeah.
That's like the Slack model.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why it became attractive to your friends at Salesforce.
Absolutely. That was the most successful choice, but yeah, it's why they liked it.
Hey, when we did our call last week, you said something I thought was worth putting on air, which is if you're a new CRO, you have to have a do no harm kind of mentality. I thought it'd be good if you would just give a few moments about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, I guess it's the Hippocratic oath of being in management. When you're the new person that they bring in, I've never been hired anywhere because things were going really great. When things are going great, you usually don't look for change agents. But when you're having some trouble and you're seeing the dangers ahead, or you're in the middle of them and you bring someone in, hopefully to help right the ship a bit, steady out the course. The most important thing to do, I believe, is to make sure that you don't mess up the things that are working. You don't show up and say, it's a little rocky today, scrap the whole thing. I've got a playbook. I got this. Done this before. I know just what you need. And slap your playbook down and say, everyone get on board, fall in line, we're doing this. No. They were a company before you got there. They had the cool idea. They've got traction, some version of traction. They've got customers paying the money, or at least companies that I work for already have customers paying the money. You have to figure out why. What was the thing that got them so excited? And how do I replicate it at scale? And not only is that going to ingratiate you to your existing customer base and probably lead them to telling more and more of their friends about you, but it's going to ingratiate you as the new leader with the teams. No one that's already been there working their butt off for months, weeks, years, whatever it's been, no one wants someone to show up and say what you're doing is wrong and it's bad. They want to hear that what you're doing was exactly what you needed to do in the previous phase. But as we're making these moves, as you're going from a 50,000 ARR company to $1 million ARR company, things change. And with that, we have to layer in some new stuff. We have to layer in these kinds of governance structures. As I hear every startup founder shivering at the concept of governance and framework, but that's really what it is. We started today talking about getting revenue commits out of marketing, getting marketing aligned with sales on targets and KPIs. That's a governance structure. Getting that in place and having a clear-eyed conversation about what do we actually do in marketing to drive money in the door, to get new clients, to get more people adopted at our existing clients. All of that comes down to having trust across the organization and people saying, I want to work with you. I want to do this. It's humans. And you'll never see a productive organization where there's a lot of animosity between marketing and sales leadership. Does not work. It's a recipe for disaster. And it all starts with showing up open-minded and ready to learn before you explain.
Fair enough. So I think that's a great place to land our conversation, except for one question I love to ask people, which is, hey, if you look back over the last 18 to 24 months, what decision would you like to have another shot at and why?
If it has to be work related.
Well, you can't second guess our tennis partnership. That's not
I think knowing the biggest mistake I've ever made, and it's unfortunately I've done it more than once, it's knowing what you're getting into and being introspective enough, but also being open and hearing, truly hearing what you're about to get into, so that when you get there, there aren't any really wild surprises. And making sure that you don't try to run before you walk. It's more than 18 months ago, but it sticks really, really firmly in my mind, unfortunately. The first head of sales job I had, we had one really big customer. They looked kind of like our other customers, but they were bigger. So we charged them 10 times more than our normal customer. And they were happy to pay because we saved them 5 or 6 times that much. But we thought, because we got this one and they think we're great and they use the system really well and they yell from the rooftops about how great it is, we're going to go get 50 more that look just like them and pay more than they pay. So we were, VC backed. We had some money, but not a massive money. This was pre-2021. And we had a sales team that was going after the normal deals. But we hired a very senior, very expensive sales guy that only focused on these massive enterprise deals. He came from one of the big legacy players. He had his Rolodex, was so ready to, knock down doors for us and going to be a millionaire by year end. It didn't work, not even a little. He was there for a year. He got frustrated. The team got frustrated with him for sure. And what we realized was we were 2 years early. I hired 15 of him 2 years ago, and they all make money. They're all 70, 80, 150% of their number. We were too early for that kind of person because I asked him to go make his own content. I asked him to do his own business development. I asked him to negotiate. I asked him to work with product. He was a rep. He was a really good rep. He was a very successful rep elsewhere, but he didn't want to do all that because he didn't have that startup spirit. And we were sending him into a beehive that wasn't ready to really adopt. So I think the biggest lesson I've ever learned is you have to make sure that you're hiring for today, not for 3 years from now. And hopefully some of the folks you hired for today, they'll evolve and be capable of growing into that team of the future. And then you can hire the rest of the folks when you get there.
All right. Hey, Ben, that was a great episode. We covered a lot of ground, and I'm truly grateful for the time we shared. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's my only social media, but I'm there.
Excellent. I'm on LinkedIn as well at LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so wherever podcasts are distributed. And Ben Page Fort, thanks so much for making the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempit at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.